Week 1 is upon us, and so it's time to go through, show you our rankings for Week 1 for every single position group so that you can set your starting lineups, get off to a good start in your fantasy football leagues. If you play fantasy football and you're here watching, make sure you do us a huge favor, like and subscribe. We're going to give you all of our rankings in one video every single week. So if you like that format where you just have to go to one place, look for your rankings, we're going to give you our entire rankings list. We're going to go through and highlight the risers and fallers compared to what's projected for the week. And then you're going to be able to know, who do I start, who do I sit? So make sure you drop a like if you enjoy that format. But let's get into it. And let's start today with running back rankings. And so week 1 is, again, always somewhat of a crapshoot. But there are some things we can take away from some of A, the matchups, B, the Vegas lines, C, the defenses that they're playing, and because of that, we've moved some players up or down. And so let's start here in the S tier, and we'll kind of go through each tier and maybe highlight only a couple guys. But the S tier obviously is Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, Breece Hall. All three of these guys project out pretty well, and there's really not a ton to be said here. We did give Saquon a slight bump up because he's supposed to be in a high-scoring matchup with the Packers this week on a new team, so we're going to expect some big things from Saquon Barkley this week. But with that being said, all three of these guys, you project to be pretty good in week 1, and you drafted them to be pretty good in week 1. So let's jump down to the H tier, and Bijan is a big guy that we're highlighting here.
Yeah, I want to highlight Bijan because I think we have been notably low on the week 1 matchup for both the Atlanta Falcons and the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think the Steelers defense is going to be able to show out and, put up a pretty solid showing week 1, and their offense isn't going to do anything. And then the Atlanta Falcons, on the other hand, have a bunch of moving pieces, a bunch of new parts that are coming into that offense. It might take a couple of weeks for them to really, figure it out. So with Bijan Robinson specifically, even though on the season we have him ranked as our RB2, I just think it's going to be a little bit of a slow start week 1. Doesn't mean that he doesn't obviously have the upside to finish as a top 3 guy, but we are going to expect him to be like a mid to low end running back 1, I think, week 1.
And you're still starting him anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Right.
So and then you got Gibbs and JT in there as well. Let's go to the B tier here. It starts with Kyren Williams, and Kyren Williams is obviously going into another high-scoring matchup with the Detroit Lions this week. But with that being said, he'll be at the top of this tier with Rachaad White. Rachaad White was somebody we were a little bit higher on, but Rachaad White actually does project to have a pretty good week on most platforms. You've got Travis Etienne in this tier. You've got Devon Achane, which I think between Achane and Mostert, they're both set to have good weeks against the Jacksonville Jaguars defense that allowed a lot of points to fantasy running backs last year. James Cook is in this tier as well. James Cook in week 1 playing the Cardinals. So that projects to be a little bit of a high-scoring matchup for the Buffalo Bills. Josh Jacobs is somebody we have in this tier. Projected somewhere in like the 18 range for this week. We have him up here as a top 12 guy. We think that Josh Jacobs is going to have a big week against an Eagles defense that, we really don't know what we're getting into here. And again, it's week 1. Isaiah Pacheco is going to be the last guy in this tier. And with Pacheco playing on Thursday night against the Baltimore Ravens, a pretty good defense, to be honest with you. I think we've got him about where he's projected and, about the 12-13 range. But that being said, Pacheco might not have the hottest start to the season if the Baltimore Ravens run defense is, everything that it should be. With that being said, it doesn't really matter. And you're still starting Isaiah Pacheco everywhere, but he'll round out the B tier here.
Yeah, and sticking with that same matchup, Derrick Henry is going to be heading up the C tier here. And I think we know that Derrick Henry generally finishes better than he starts, not just from a game-to-game perspective, but like a total season perspective as well. He usually gets better as everyone else gets worse because that's why Derrick Henry is going to be in the Hall of Fame. But expect, a decent start for him and a good offense, but we're not expecting anything like out of this world where he's just going to go nuts. But he will be at the top of the C tier here because he is Derrick Henry. Another guy I want to highlight in this range is Joe Mixon. I think the reason we have him a little bit lower this week as a basically mid to low end running back too is we expect the passing game for the Houston Texans to be insane. We expect Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins all to be pretty productive, including C.J. Stroud. Obviously, he's going to be the reason for that, and that's because the Colts secondary is so bad, and their run defense and defensive line overall is pretty good. So Joe Mixon, unless he gets a touchdown, I think we're looking at him kind of being in this range, even though he's the alpha, the number 1 running back in that room.
Yeah. Let's go to the D's tier now, and let's talk about Monty. Monty is a little bit higher for us than on some platforms because, again, it's going to be a high-scoring matchup. So we're totally fine flexing David Montgomery this week, if not starting him in your second running back spot. James Conner, obviously, projects about the same. 2 guys we want to highlight here in this tier in particular, though, are Raheem Mostert. a lot of people are assuming, okay, because we drafted Devon Achane in the second round of fantasy drafts and we drafted Raheem Mostert in the seventh round of fantasy drafts, Mike McDaniel knows that. Mike McDaniel is going to be respectful of our fantasy teams, and he's going to come out and give Devon Achane all the work he can handle. And that's not going to happen. What's going to happen, especially towards the beginning of the year, is you're going to see these guys get pretty even work. Most likely, you're going to see Raheem Mostert get the start. I think he's probably going to start Sunday. And even if he doesn't, I think you're going to see him get about the same amount of work as Devon Achane. And what it comes down to with these guys is who gets the touchdowns? Who ends up getting the carries in the red zones? I would expect the Miami Dolphins to come out absolutely firing this week. And so because of that, I want every single piece of their offense in my lineup, including Raheem Mostert. And Raheem Mostert is projected somewhere in the 25 to 30 range this week on most platforms. We have him ranked here in the 19 to 20 range because, again,
get those red zone carries.
If he as soon as he gets 2 touchdowns, it's a hit. If he gets 1 touchdown, it's a hit because I think Raheem Mostert is going to get a fair amount of work this week. And then Tony Pollard. And a lot of people are going to say, well, we don't know. With Spears, we did see in the preseason that Tony Pollard got the majority of snaps over Tyjae Spears. It was like a 60-40 split. And so with that being said, I would expect Tony Pollard to come out and immediately get all the valuable touches that the Tennessee Titans have for him because they just did sign him to that contract and because I do think he is the guy that's going to get carries in the red zone. And so with that being said, playing the Chicago Bears in week 1, nobody really knows what to expect from the Chicago Bears. The defense has always kind of been and I would expect the defense to be again, right? It's obviously new on the offensive side, but in terms of defense, we really don't know what we're getting into this season with the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears last year would have been a fairly decent matchup for Tony Pollard, but with that being said, we are higher on Tony Pollard simply because a lot of people are projecting Tony Pollard to be the running back like 27 through 30 this week. And I think he's going to be a running back 2 this week. So I'm totally comfortable starting Tony Pollard in my fantasy football teams this week. He was definitely worth highlighting here as well.
Yeah, he started strong last year too. So
yeah.
I would expect him to do that, and then we can talk about him weeks beyond week 1. But with the F tier, I think this is kind of like the vacated volume tier. A bunch of guys like Zamir White, Najee Harris, Singletary, Ford, B-Rob, all very self-explanatory for the most part. I do want to highlight Najee Harris, though, because we are notably lower on Najee Harris going into week 1. Again, some of it is the matchup. A lot of it is just the fact that Najee Harris is not a very good running back.
Right.
And that offense is going to be abysmal and miserable to watch all year, most likely. With Arthur Smith doing a bunch of cute stuff with Cordell Patterson and no names. So with Najee Harris, I'm not expecting much from him or Jalen Warren, honestly, who was struggling with injury a little bit this offseason as well. So he might have a slow start. And then Tyjae Spears, I did bump him a little higher up in my rankings than Avery did. Honestly, the only reason is because I trust the running backs in an offense where the quarterback as a passer is a little bit questionable to start week 1, and then you start to see them like trust him more, and then he has a little more passing volume. I mean, they could start guns ablazing with Will Levis week 1, and that would be totally fine. But I'm just going to trust the guys that are the easiest targets, the easiest guys to get the ball to that are both explosive in Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. At the end of the day, it's starting to be a crapshoot in this range, and I think most of these guys have like low-end running back 2 upside in week 1.
Yeah, and to go against that a little bit, I ranked him about 10 spots lower than Nathan. I don't think Tyjae gets any touchdowns this week, if I had to guess. If he does, it obviously is going to be like, okay, you flexed him. But I have Tyjae in some rosters. I'm not flexing him this week just because I felt like since I bumped Pollard up so high, which I bumped Pollard up higher than you by 8 spots. So that's the difference, is I had Pollard as a mid running back 2 this week.
We would both prefer Pollard over Spears this week, though.
Yeah, you got them only 2 spots apart.
Yeah, I still prefer Pollard over Spears.
So
I ranked him ahead of him.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like a Moss and Brown situation where it's like, I think it's going to be Moss.
Yeah.
And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
All right. On that note, Chase Brown, Zach Moss at the top of this next tier here. We don't really know who's going to be the starting running back here. They're back-to-back in our rankings. They're back-to-back in Nathan and I's rankings.
You've got Chase Brown over Moss. I have Chase Brown over Moss by 1 spot.
By 1 spot. Like, we don't know.
Yeah.
Comfortable maybe flexing one of them. Pick whichever one you think, and then after week 1, we're probably going to have a better idea, I think. Maybe. Yep. I don't know. And then in the rest of this tier after those guys, Chuba Hubbard, Austin Eckler, Gus Edwards, Rico Dowdle, all guys that probably don't project super high this week, but again, you got them ranked in like the 33 to 38 range here, and so you're flexing them if you have to. In deeper leagues, maybe you're flexing these guys, but these are all guys that are running back 2s on their offense for the most part, and most of them are on bad offenses, and so we're going to try to stay away from them as we can. But at the top of this last year, we got Jalen Warren.
Yeah, so Jalen Warren is a guy that we're just not super excited for to begin the season. Again, he's been struggling with injury to start the year, and it's not a friendly matchup at all. I know it's an Arthur Smith revenge game. Revenge from what? Being fired and being a terrible head coach? Like, I'm just not excited for this at all. I think it's kind of a crapshoot with who's going to outproduce who in that offense at the running back position. It's whatever. We would definitely not recommend starting him this week. And then kind of towards the end of this tier, we do have Ty Chandler, who I think is kind of a curious guy to look at here just because he is playing alongside Aaron Jones. So Aaron Jones will get a majority of the usage. We have seen other running backs get usage alongside Aaron Jones and be productive because Aaron Jones is not a bell cow running back. He is more of a receiving back, a gadget guy. So with Ty Chandler, he could eventually get some volume and opportunity there. And Aaron Jones has been struggling with injury the past couple of years as well. So anytime he's banged up, Ty Chandler is the next man up. He's going to be getting all the workload, all the opportunity there. Again, we're tempering the expectations. He's at the very end of this tier, but just a guy to keep an eye on in weeks ahead.
All right, let's go to wide receivers now, and let's talk about the S tier here. There's going to be 4 guys in this tier: Tyreek, Amon-Ra, A.J. Brown, and C.D. Lamb.
You can argue it.
Yeah, whatever. And I mean, obviously, the guys we moved down here into the A tier are Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and we moved up A.J. Brown. Good matchup. C.D. Lamb, we expect to be dominant, but it doesn't matter. You're starting all these guys anyways.
Right.
Expect all these guys to have pretty decent week ones. Wide receivers typically don't get off to slow starts. Jamar Chase is kind of the big question mark in the A tier, so I'll kind of let you talk about that.
Yeah, I think his biggest question mark is just holding out the entire offseason. And still, technically,
he's not practicing.
He's still not practicing. He's going to play, but they're playing New England, so it's like actually kind of a good matchup because that's not a great defense, and they traded away all their guys. But with Chase, I just would expect a little bit of a slow start, not just because he's not practicing, but also because the Bugles consistently do not start the season strong, and they always put themselves in a hole that they have to dig themselves out of to end the season, and they go on this crazy run and all that. It's at this point like a tale as old as time, it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
But with Chase, again, you're starting him. So with the B tier, there is one guy that I want to highlight here, and that is Nico Collins. He's right underneath Devontae Adams, who's heading up the B tier. But with Nico Collins is projected to be like the wide receiver 18, and I don't understand when you're playing the Colts secondary how you can't be higher. Avery and I literally boosted him up 10 spots. Both of us did.
Yeah.
I've got him as wide receiver 9. Avery has him as wide receiver 11. And expect a big week from Nico Collins. I think a lot of people are going to be victory lapping saying that Nico is going to be on a top 6 wide receiver trajectory after week 1. Yeah, because he played the Colts. So just be ready for that. He's going to have a good week.
Yeah, let's go to the C tier here, and let's highlight Cooper Kupp. Again, in a matchup with the Detroit Lions this week where I just want to start every piece of that offense. And with Kupp, I mean, I think it's one of those situations where you'll see him and Puka in week 1 both produce, and we're probably not going to have answers after week 1. But most people are starting or flexing Kupp anyways, so I definitely want to keep him there. Guys in this tier, Drake London, Amari Cooper, you're obviously starting all these guys. Drake London we have a little bit lower than consensus because of the matchup this week against the Steelers. Probably not the most ideal matchup to start his third year in the NFL, but I do expect him to pick it up after this game. Amari Cooper, obviously he's here, and then Deebo Samuel and DK Metcalf. Both of those guys are you probably starting or flexing if you can anyways. And then we kind of get into the guys we've moved down a little bit here.
Yeah, so at the top of the D tier, you've got you're starting to see your first rookies go off the board. Obviously the best and Marvin Harrison Jr. Great situation. Kyler Murray throwing him the ball. Week 1, he's a rookie. Give him a little bit of time. Would I be shocked if he goes nuts and gets 20 targets like Puka Nacua did last year? No, I wouldn't be shocked, but I'm just tempering the expectations a little bit. He's probably going to be, a low-end wide receiver 2. And then there's a bunch of guys in this range as well, right? Devonta Smith, wide receiver 2. DJ Moore, questionable situation. Stephon Diggs, we don't know. Zay Flowers, we don't know. Brandon Ayuk hasn't practiced all offseason. He's probably going to start a little bit cold. We don't really know. So and then Tank Dell, who we did push up boards significantly. I did quite a bit more than you did just because, again, the situation I think is very friendly for every single one of those receivers in that offense.
Yeah, and let's go to the F tier here, and let's talk about another rookie at the top of this tier, and that's Malik Neighbors. We have Malik Neighbors 11 spots lower than projected this week. It's for a couple of reasons here. Number one,
offense.
It's an awful offense, and everybody knows that. But for Malik Neighbors, I mean, I think it's hard enough. I think it's hard enough this week starting him and thinking, okay, he's going to go off in his first game as a rookie. If he does, hooray, he does. But again, playing a Vikings defense where we don't know a ton about that defense yet, I would think Malik Neighbors will, I just be weary with rookies. But Well, you're drafting Malik Neighbors in your fantasy drafts high enough to where I think you have to start him this week. I wouldn't expect a top 15 week from Malik Neighbors, top 20 week from Malik Neighbors. I would expect more like a wide receiver 2 to 3 week from Malik Neighbors this week. With that being said, I think you still do have to start him unless you have some really good options that have kind of flown up the tiers here. One of those options that we really like that may be kind of flexible for you is Jaden Reed. Again, what should be a good matchup against the Eagles for the wide receivers and the Packers. I like starting Jaden Reed this week. I like starting Christian Watson. I like starting Romeo Doubs. Obviously, Dontavian Wicks could get there. We just don't know. Last year, he didn't get there. He's only projected like 5 to 6 points on most platforms. And so with that being said, Jaden Reed is the guy that I think is going to get the most targets. I think him and Christian Watson are both pretty freaking good starts this week. And Christian Watson's not far behind him here in the next tier. But with that being said, I think from this tier, we're obviously a little bit higher on Calvin Ridley for the whole season. We're obviously a little bit higher on Rashee Rice for the whole season. Jaden Reed is a guy we had about 8 spots higher than projected. And so Jaden Reed is a guy that you definitely want to make sure he's in your lineups this week because he is set to have a fairly good week, as well as Christian Watson, I would say. So
yeah, and then at the top of the G tier, we've got Higgins and Christian Watson, who Avery just mentioned. I think we expect Christian Watson to have a pretty decent week to start out the gate. And again, what we know with Christian Watson is when he's not injured, he generally has pretty high upside and touchdown opportunity because he can play that X role. And then George Pickens and Deontay Johnson I want to highlight as kind of low light because Pickens, again, we don't trust anything about the Pittsburgh Steelers in that situation, especially in the passing game. Russell Wilson, I think, is going to look absolutely abysmal, like really, really, really bad. And then Deontay Johnson, I think, is kind of just going to have to ease into his role of being the number one option there. And I'd expect the Carolina Panthers to start slow. Again, it's week 1. Anything can happen. Some of these upsets, these crazy upsets that you don't expect, happen in week 1. And that could be the Carolina Panthers against a division rival in the New Orleans Saints. But generally, when they match up against each other, division rivals in that specific division, it's kind of unknown, especially with the Carolina Panthers and in the New Orleans Saints. They generally have like some low scoring games, and Deontay Johnson, I would say, probably is going to have a little bit of a slow start. It's kind of TBD with him, but I don't trust the matchup at all.
So I think those are both guys in Pickens and Johnson where if you can sit them if you can afford to. I think I would do that this week. Yeah. Let's go to the H tier here. Again, I already talked about Romeo Doubs. We're significantly higher on him this week. He's a guy that gets 10 to 12 points every week for the most part when he's on the field. And so if he does end up getting another touchdown or two, he could have really high upside in your flex. So I like that as a high upside flex this week. Jordan Addison is down here in this tier as well. We had him a little bit higher than consensus just because TJ Hawkinson is still out and they are playing the Giants, right? And so he is the second option against the Giants. Even if Sam Darnold does end up sucking, which is, probable, but yet to be seen, we're still going to be a little bit more comfortable flexing Jordan Addison, I think, than some of these guys. But the last guy we want to really highlight here, actually 2 guys. Jamison Williams. Again, we talked about this matchup. Jamo's a long touchdown away in week 1 from A, you wish you had him in your flex spot, so I'm thinking about flexing him in a lot of my leagues this week. And B, everybody freaking out about him. Yes. And so I think if you are in that situation, I'm okay giving him a shot this week. And then Khalil Shakir is last year, and it's because and Shakir is actually projected around where we have him. We have like 2 spots higher than where he's projected on most platforms. And with that being said, I think it's mostly because Keon Coleman is a rookie, and we expect Keon Coleman to start slow. Dalton Kincaid, we haven't seen him like break out yet. And so what's Josh Allen's safety blanket going to be in week 1? I think it's probably going to be his slot wide receiver in Khalil Shakir. So we'll go ahead and be comfortable starting him as well. But let's jump now. Let's do QBs and tight ends real quick. I'll start with QBs. S tier, Allen, Hurts, Lamar, all guys with fairly good matchups, fairly high rushing upside as well. These are the guys in the S tier. They're probably going to be here most weeks.
Yeah, and then A tier, you've got the remaining proven rushing guys in Anthony Richardson. I say proven. Kyler Murray. And then you've got your chunk of CJ Stroud and Jordan Love, which is great matchups. And then you can't not have Patrick Mahomes in this tier because it's Patrick Mahomes. This is going to be pretty consensus, pretty normal, pretty usual for most of these guys throughout the year. But CJ Stroud is a guy that we moved up significantly because of the matchup, and Jordan Love was another guy that we think is just going to have a really great day. And then the B tier, heading that up is going to be Jared Goff with another great matchup with the LA Rams that we expect to be high scoring.
And so we want all those guys in our lineups. And we've got Goff here, we've got Burrow here, we've got Tua. We did put Jaden Daniels here. We lowered Jaden Daniels about 3 spots compared to where other platforms had him ranked, but that's mainly because he's a rookie. He's probably going to start a little bit slow, but he does have rushing upside. And so it's how much of that rushing upside comes out in week 1. I think we have him as the 12th quarterback. And so I think if you have Jaden Daniels as your QB1, you're starting him. I have a team where I have Jaden Daniels and Jared Goff. I'm going to give Goff the nod this week, obviously. I have Goff ranked higher, and I think I'm more comfortable with that matchup and a veteran in week 1 over a rookie. So if you're in that situation, you have like a veteran quarterback on your team that you can maybe start that's ranked higher than Jaden Daniels, you do it. But outside of that, I think Jaden Daniels, while he may start slow, the rushing upside could give him a quarterback 1 finish in his first week in the NFL.
Yep, and then the next tier is going to be a bunch of guys that, again, matchup-wise, we're just a little bit lower on them, but they do have the upside to be a top 12 producing quarterback in week 1. That's Brock Purdy, Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams, the other rookie, and then Matt Stafford as well. I think Matt Stafford, you can make the argument that he could be higher here. I have him a bit lower than Avery does, just because even when the Rams are super productive, sometimes Stafford's production doesn't necessarily follow, whether that be Kyron Williams getting red zone carries, whether that be, Puka Nacua getting all the volume or whatever. I don't really know. But with these guys, I think you're comfortable starting any of them if they were, your first option, the first guy that you drafted at the quarterback position in your fantasy draft.
The D's tier, the first guy in this is going to be Dak Prescott playing the Cleveland Browns defense. This could be a rock fight. It could be. Yeah. Dak could have a pretty good week. It's a tough defense for quarterbacks. It really is. They don't allow a lot of points to quarterbacks. They didn't last year. They're returning a lot of the same guys. Expect that to be a little bit of an interesting game for Dak. Kirk Cousins is a guy that Nathan has 8 spots higher than consensus, and I have him ranked at consensus.
We flipped on Stafford and Cousins.
And so for Stafford, I like the matchup. I have Puka and Kupp projected really high, and so I'm like, I got to rank.
You got to rank.
So with Cousins, my thing was first game back from injury, playing the Steelers, and so it's a fairly good defense most of the time. And so I figured he'd come out a little bit shaky before he kind of got his feet under him and started finishing top 12 again.
That's very possible. But I can't argue with that.
But honestly, he also could throw for 3 touchdowns and 300 yards,
right?
Because it's Kirk Cousins,
London and Pitts,
and he has Cousins
and
Pitts,
Bijan's receiving threat. So.
Yeah, and then the rest of this tier, Daniel Jones is down here. We have him ranked higher than consensus by a couple spots because again, Daniel Jones does have rushing upside, and all he has to do to not suck is not suck. And that's hard for Daniel Jones.
Big ask.
But we did see Daniel Jones, and he was fairly good for a period of time a couple years ago. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. And then
fairly productive.
And we'll end it with Geno Smith here. This is 23. And then guys on the rest of this list: Darnold, Rodgers, Levis, Carr. We're not even going to rank them because you're probably, unless you're in a Superflex league, not even starting them. So tight ends. Let's talk about the S tier. It's Laporta and Kelsey. It's going to be this way most of the season. Yep. Laporta, good matchup. Kelsey, not so good matchup, but it's Travis Kelsey. You have to rank him here in the S tier.
Yeah, we got a big chunk of guys here that I think could finish, as high as 3 and as low as 7 or 8. You've got Andrews, Kincaid, McBride, Ingram, and Kittle. Honestly, McBride, I couldn't even argue if you wanted to put him at tight end 3, because if we're assuming that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to start a little bit slow, you would also hope that Trey McBride is going to have a pretty good week with Kyler Murray there as well. But we don't really know. Dalton Kincaid, we think is a wide receiver 1, the top option for it. Josh Allen. I said wide receiver 1 intentionally because I think he's going to be the top receiving option there. And then George Kittle, I do want to highlight here as well. George Kittle's just so dang consistent. Even though he puts up a dud here and there, across the season, he's very consistent. He always finishes as a top 6 producing tight end, and his ability to put up 30 points in a game is next to only Travis Kelce. Seriously. So he's consistently going to be in this tier at the end of the tier, even though we don't love the matchup as much. You got to have him here.
All right, Kittle. Let's go to the B tier here. Njoku is a guy we have all these guys pretty much exactly where they're ranked. Njoku, yep. Pitts, and Ferguson. Pitts, not a great matchup. Njoku, not a great matchup. Ferguson, obviously same game, not a great matchup. And so all of these guys, I think you drafted them to be your tight end 1. You're starting them as your tight end 1.
Yep. And then Dallas Goedert here. If you have Dallas Goedert and Brock Bowers on the same team, which I've seen before, you probably want to start Dallas Goedert over Bowers, who's a rookie this year, but they are going to be in the same tier just because the Swiss Army knife that Brock Bowers is. And then Pat Frymuth, Dalton Schultz. Those types of guys that are the number 1 options, can get a decent amount of volume. It really is just dependent on, are they going to get a touchdown or not? And then that D tier with Kmet, Henry, and Otten, they got a lot of competition in their receiving rooms, but any given week they can, put up a decent amount of numbers. It's just 1 in every 3 or 4 games. So they are going to be guys that if you faded tight ends and you went with one of those guys, you have to start them, and you're hopeful that they're going to be able to do something for you in week 1.
And then after here, guys, you're not really starting if you have a choice. Obviously, Musgrave, we gave a little bit of a bump. Colby Parkinson, we gave a little bit of a bump because of the matchups. But all these guys are guys, if you can help it, you're not starting in your tight end slot. So there you go. There's our complete rankings for every position this week. Again, if you enjoy this format, if you want us to do the rankings like this the rest of the season, make sure you drop a like and make sure you subscribe to get these rankings as soon as they come out every single week. But we're going to kind of, adjust based on what our feedback from you guys is. So make sure you guys like and subscribe. Those two things help us out a ton. And make sure if you've drafted your team, which you probably should have by this point, head over to flockfantasy.com/domain and get a team blueprint. The link's going to be in the pinned comment. You can get a team blueprint and you don't have to be a member of the site. Or you can sign up for the annual Mother Flocker tier using code domain, and you get one for free. When, you sign up with the annual tier using code domain, we'll give you a free team blueprint. Nathan and I will sit down, review your fantasy team, tell you where you need to be improving, tell you what moves you need to be making, tell you where you need to target on the waiver wire, all of that and more. Flockfantasy.com/domain. We appreciate you guys, and we'll see you later.